She was 30 years old, worth $3 billion, and 45 minutes away from signing the biggest defense contract in her company's history. She had no idea that the men standing guard outside her own building were not there to protect her. They were there to make sure she never left it alive. And the only person who noticed, the only person who saw it coming, was a quiet 37-year-old single father sitting across the street, drinking coffee that was already going cold. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't assigned to her. He owed her absolutely nothing. But he crossed the street anyway. If you're new here, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Let's begin. The morning started the way most dangerous mornings do, quietly. No warning, no dramatic shift in the sky. Just a Tuesday in early October, pale and overcast, with traffic moving normally down Meridian Avenue and pigeons doing whatever pigeons do on ledges above revolving glass doors. Cole Barrett was on his second cup of coffee when he noticed the first SUV. He wasn't looking for it specifically. He was sitting at a window table inside a diner called Ely's, which occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building across from the Carrington Strategic Technologies headquarters, a 40-story tower of steel and dark glass that dominated the eastern end of the block. Cole was there because he had a 9:15 appointment with a mid-sized manufacturing company 3 blocks west, and he'd arrived early the way he always arrived early. Habit. Old habit, the kind you don't shake after 12 years of operating in places where being late meant being dead. He noticed the SUV because its engine was running. That was it. That was the entire observation. A black Suburban parked along the curb at the north end of the building, engine idling, and nobody getting in or out of it. Most people wouldn't register that. Cole registered it the way other people register the smell of smoke, automatically, before conscious thought caught up. He picked up his coffee and watched. By the time he'd finished the cup, he'd counted 3. 3 black SUVs. Different positions, north curb, south service entrance, and one parked diagonally at the mouth of the side alley, which was not a legal parking spot, but nobody was writing a ticket. All 3 had their engines running. All 3 were pointed toward exits. Cole set down his cup. He pulled out his phone, opened a browser, and typed, Carrington Strategic Technologies. The first result was a news article from that morning. Carrington CEO Evelyn Carrington expected to finalize $12 billion federal defense contract at board meeting today. 11:00 a.m. Cole read that twice. Then he looked up from his phone and studied the front entrance of the building across the street. He saw the guards immediately. Or rather, he saw what was wrong with the guards. There were 6 of them visible from where he sat, stationed in pairs at the main entrance and along the plaza. Their uniforms were right. Navy blazers, earpieces, the standard posture of corporate security. But the way they moved wasn't right. They weren't watching for civilian threats, aggressive pedestrians, suspicious packages, the ordinary hazards of building security. They were watching each other, checking sight lines. Their body language was inward-facing rather than outward-facing, and there was a quality of readiness in how they stood that had nothing to do with opening doors for executives. Cole had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. He'd operated in 6 countries across 2 continents. He had been, at various points in his career, the most dangerous thing in whatever room he entered. He recognized what he was looking at. Those men were not protecting that building. They were controlling it. He left $4 on the table and walked out of the diner. His name was Cole Barrett, and almost nothing about his current life suggested his former one. He was 37, lean rather than heavily built, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of face that was easy to overlook. Not unpleasant, just unremarkable in a crowd. He drove a 7-year-old Ford pickup that made a grinding noise on cold mornings. He lived in a 2-bedroom rental on Aldgate Street, 12 minutes from his daughter's elementary school, and he spent a significant portion of every week helping Haley with 4th-grade math homework, which she found maddening and which Cole found, if he was being honest, occasionally maddening as well. His wife, Rachel, had died 4 years ago in a car accident during a February ice storm. A delivery truck had run a red light on the Garfield overpass. The truck driver survived. Rachel didn't. Cole had been overseas when it happened, debriefing after an op, and he'd made it home in time to identify her at the county hospital, but not in time to say goodbye. He left the Navy 8 months later. Not dramatically, not in some clean, decisive moment. He'd simply found, during a mission in the 6th month after Rachel died, that he was no longer able to make himself care whether he came home. That seemed like information worth acting on. He filed the paperwork and went home to his daughter. The security consulting work had come together gradually. Cole was careful, thorough, and had a specific set of skills and experiences that certain companies found difficult to replicate with conventionally trained personnel. He didn't advertise. He worked mostly through referrals. He charged enough to keep the rent paid and Haley in a school district with decent teachers, and he didn't take jobs that required him to be gone overnight unless absolutely unavoidable, because Haley was 9 years old and had already lost one parent, and Cole had decided, quietly, without drama, the way he made most decisions, that she was not going to feel like she was losing another one. That was his life. That was the man who looked both ways and crossed Meridian Avenue toward a 40-story building that was already becoming something very dangerous. The lobby of Carrington Strategic Technologies was all marble and polished steel, high ceilings with recessed lighting, a reception desk staffed by 2 young women who looked appropriately professional. Cole pushed through the revolving door, paused, and took in the room in the 2 seconds before anyone noticed him. The lobby security had been replaced. It was subtle. The uniforms matched. But the 2 men stationed near the elevator bank were not the same build or the same bearing as typical corporate security hires. One of them had a particular stillness, the absence of small, habitual movement, that Cole associated with people who had been trained to wait a very long time for a specific moment. The other was watching the stairwell door. Not the main entrance. The stairwell door. Cole walked to the reception desk with the easy confidence of a man who was expected. "Good morning," he said. "Cole Barrett. I'm here for the Harwick meeting on 12. There was no Harwick meeting on 12. He'd invented it on the walk across the street. The receptionist began typing. "I don't see you on the schedule for..." "Could be under Barrett Security. They sometimes list us under the firm name." He kept his voice pleasant and unhurried, the way you spoke when you were absolutely certain you were supposed to be somewhere. "If it's easier, I can wait while you call up." While she was distracted, he was reading the room. Elevators, 4 banks, 2 currently held on upper floors longer than normal traffic patterns would explain. The emergency stairwell to his left. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see the shadow of someone standing on the other side. The second lobby security guard migrated 2 steps to the right in the last 90 seconds, which put him in a position to block the main exit without appearing to do so. They were preparing to lock the building down. "Mr. Barrett, I'm not finding..." "That's okay." Cole smiled. "I'll just give them a call directly. You've been very helpful." He stepped back from the desk, turned away from the elevators, and walked with complete calm toward the corridor that led to the building's secondary entrance on the east side. The entrance corporate security staffed primarily during high-volume morning hours, and which, he had noted on his way through the lobby, was currently unstaffed. He pushed through the east corridor door and moved quickly. He needed to find Evelyn Carrington before she walked into that board meeting. Finding her took 11 minutes and 1 calculated gamble. Cole had no access to the company's internal directory, no building schematic, and no way to contact Evelyn directly. What he had was an educated guess. A CEO preparing for the most significant contract ratification in her company's history, 90 minutes before an 11:00 board meeting, would be either in her executive suite reviewing documents or already moving between floors managing the final preparations. The executive suites, on a building like this, would be on one of the top 5 floors. He took the service elevator to 38. The service corridors on the upper floors were narrow and fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial cleaner and the particular stale warmth of recirculated air. Cole moved through them the way he'd moved through worse places, quietly, with purpose, stopping twice to listen before continuing. He found her on the 37th floor. She was standing outside the elevator bank with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm, speaking in a low, intense voice into her phone. She was shorter than he'd expected, with dark hair pulled back sharply, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been chosen to project authority rather than attractiveness. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were moving, tracking, the way people's eyes moved when they were trying to manage multiple problems at once. She looked, Cole thought, like someone who ran toward problems instead of away from them. He didn't have time to appreciate it. He walked directly toward her. Her eyes cut to him immediately. She was alert, whatever else was going on, and she pulled the phone slightly from her ear. Evelyn Carrington. His voice was low, level. My name is Cole Barrett. I'm a security consultant. I was across the street this morning, and I need 30 seconds of your time. I'm sorry, who are you? Cole Barrett, 30 seconds. I'm not a threat. She studied him with the particular expression of someone weighing whether they were about to do something foolish. You're clearly not building staff. Security is going to... Your lobby security has been replaced. The men in the lobby are not Carrington employees. 3 vehicles are staged outside. 2 at exits, 1 blocking the service alley. Engines running. And your elevators are being held on upper floors. He said it all at a measured pace, watching her face. Someone is about to lock this building down from the inside. And your board meeting starts in... He checked his watch. 88 minutes. The phone lowered. Her expression had shifted. Show me, she said. He pulled up the window view from an 18th floor maintenance access point, a narrow landing above a mechanical room that looked down through wire-reinforced glass onto the street below. From there, the 3 SUVs were visible, and the positioning was obvious. Evelyn Carrington stood beside him and said nothing for a long moment. I saw this in the financial projections, she said finally. Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it had changed. Adrian left a note. Full board ratification. No delays. I thought he was just being thorough. Who's Adrian? My CFO. She paused. 11 years. Cole watched her process that. He'd seen people process betrayal before, usually in the field, usually faster than civilian life required. Because in the field you processed it and moved, or you didn't move at all. Evelyn Carrington processed it in about 4 seconds. Okay, she said. What do you need from me? I need you to not go to that board meeting until we understand what we're dealing with. There are 34 people in that building who have no idea. I know. He kept his voice even. I understand. But if we walk into that room before we know who's holding the doors, we're not helping them. We're joining them. He met her eyes. I need you to trust me for about an hour. Can you do that? She looked at him for a moment that stretched longer than comfortable. You were just across the street, she said. Drinking coffee. Yes. You don't work for me. No. Then why are you here? Cole didn't have a clean answer for that. He had the honest one, which was messier. Because I saw it, he said, and I had time to do something about it. Evelyn studied him a moment longer. Then she opened her portfolio and pulled out her phone. There's one person in this building I still trust completely, she said. Miranda Shaw, General Counsel. We need to get to her. Cole nodded. Maintenance corridors. Stay close. They moved. The 18th floor maintenance corridor was barely wide enough for 2 people, and the lights ran on a motion sensor system that kicked on in sections ahead of them as they walked and clicked off in sections behind, which gave the uncomfortable impression of being swallowed by a building that was digesting them as they went. Evelyn moved faster than Cole expected. She wasn't athletic in an obvious way, but she was deliberate. She watched where he stepped and replicated it, stayed close enough that he could hear her breathing, but far enough that she wasn't crowding him. She'd pulled her hair loose from its arrangement and removed her blazer, folding it over her arm. Practical. She was thinking clearly, even though, Cole estimated, she was also quietly terrified, which was the correct response to her situation and the sign of a functioning mind. Tell me exactly what you saw, she said, barely above a murmur. The vehicles first. Not unmarked exactly. Civilian plates, but all 3 from the same lot. Probably fleet registered to a security or logistics company. The drivers were staying low, which means they've been briefed to avoid face recognition. Cole kept his voice to the same register. The guards at your entrance are trained. Not necessarily military, but close. Private contractors, probably. Someone hired a professional team. For what? Depends on what the goal is. Best case, they're here to ensure the board meeting proceeds in a specific direction, under duress if necessary. He paused. Other cases are worse. She was quiet for 5 steps. How much worse? Cole didn't answer, which was its own answer. Evelyn absorbed it. Miranda is on 22, Executive Support Wing, northeast corner. Is there another way to 22 that doesn't use the main elevators or the primary stairwells? The HVAC service access runs between floors. Maintenance staff use it during off hours. I'll need a key. She reached into the interior pocket of her portfolio and produced a key card on a plain lanyard. Executive emergency access. Opens everything. Cole looked at the card, then at her. You carry that with you. I carry a lot of things with me. She met his eyes without apology. I built this company. I know every door in it. Cole took the card. He was beginning to understand why someone had decided she needed to be removed rather than negotiated with. They moved toward the service access ladder. Above them, 34 people sat in a boardroom waiting for a meeting that someone had designed to be the last thing they attended. Cole climbed first, cleared the landing, and reached a hand down. Evelyn Carrington took it without hesitation. They kept moving. The service access ladder between floors 18 and 22 was the kind of infrastructure that existed in every large building and that almost nobody ever thought about. A metal spine running through the body of the tower, painted industrial gray, bolted to concrete, smelling of rust and dust and the particular dead air of spaces that never saw daylight. Cole went first, testing each rung before committing his weight, and Evelyn followed 3 rungs behind him, her portfolio tucked under one arm, her heels hooked awkwardly on the rungs because she hadn't had the option of choosing better footwear that morning. She didn't complain. Cole noticed that. They came out on a maintenance landing on 22, and Cole eased the access panel open 2 inches before opening it fully. Old habit, the kind that had kept him alive in places where opening a door too fast was a decision you made exactly once. The corridor beyond was empty. Fluorescent lighting, gray carpet, the distant sound of a ventilation system doing its work. Normal. Or at least normal looking, which wasn't the same thing. Northeast corner, Evelyn said quietly, behind him. Cole held up a hand. Wait. And listened for another 10 seconds. Then he pushed the panel open and they stepped through. The executive support wing on 22 was arranged differently from the maintenance corridors below. Wider hallways, framed architectural photographs on the walls, actual carpet instead of sealed concrete. It felt like a different building, which in some ways it was. This was the floor where decisions were documented and argued and ultimately given legal form. General Counsel territory. The door to Miranda Shaw's office was closed, but a thin line of light showed underneath it. Cole knocked twice, quick and quiet. A pause. Then a woman's voice. Who is it? Is it Evelyn? A beat. And someone else. Open the door, Miranda. The lock clicked. The door swung inward and Miranda Shaw appeared in the gap. Late 50s, silver-haired, wearing reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression that suggested she had been waiting for something bad and was not entirely surprised that it had arrived. She looked at Cole with the precise, measuring gaze of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong judgment call cost everything. Who are you? She asked him directly. Cole Barrett, security consultant. He was across the street, Evelyn said. He's the reason I'm standing here instead of walking into the boardroom. She stepped past Miranda into the office. Close the door. Lock it. Miranda locked the door, then turned and looked at them both with the expression of someone who had already been running their own calculations and had arrived at conclusions they did not like. I've been trying to reach you for 40 minutes, she said to Evelyn. My phone, I thought it was a signal issue. It's not a signal issue. Miranda moved to her desk. A wide mahogany surface covered in organized stacks of documents and 3 open laptops running simultaneously, and turned one of the screens toward them. Your communications have been selectively filtered. Incoming calls from my office, from 2 board members, and from the federal contracts liaison have all been redirected to a voicemail buffer that Adrian controls. She said his name the way you said the name of something you just found in a place it had absolutely no business being. It took me most of the morning to figure out why none of my calls were going through. Evelyn stood very still. How long have you known something was wrong? Miranda sat down. She took her reading glasses off her forehead and set them on the desk, and for a moment she looked every one of her 58 years. I've suspected for about 6 weeks. I've known for certain since Thursday. She opened a drawer and produced a manila folder, thick with printed documents. But I want you to understand, what I'm about to show you is significantly worse than what you're imagining. Cole pulled a chair to the side of the desk, where he could see both the door and Miranda's screen. Tell us the worst version. Miranda looked at him for a moment, apparently decided he had earned a straight answer, and gave him one. For approximately 14 months, Adrian Locke has been operating as a paid agent for an investment organization called the Vantage Meridian Group. Nominally, Vantage Meridian is a private equity firm registered in Delaware with additional entities in Luxembourg and Singapore. She paused. In practice, it's a funding vehicle for a foreign-backed consortium that acquires strategic defense assets in the American market. They've done it twice before. Once with a mid-sized aerospace components firm in 2019, once with a communications infrastructure company in 2021. Both times, the acquisition was structured to look like routine corporate distress. Both times, the target company's internal financial officer was the primary facilitator. The room was quiet except for the ventilation and the distant sound of the building around them doing its ordinary business, unaware. "He hollowed us out," Evelyn said. Her voice was flat and precise, stripped of inflection. "Adrian hollowed us out. Over 14 months, yes. Shell companies received wire transfers disguised as vendor payments and licensing fees. Board resolutions were forged, not clumsily either. They used actual signature data from scanned documents, and the forgeries wouldn't have been caught in a routine audit. The restructuring agreements you signed last spring, the ones reorganizing the subsidiary framework, those were modified after your signature was obtained. The versions in the official record are not the versions you reviewed." Evelyn closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she opened them. And the contract, the federal contract. That's what this is all about. Miranda turned another screen toward them. Once Carrington Strategic Technologies is under Vantage Meridian's effective control, the $12 billion defense contract transfers with the company. The federal government's vetting process evaluated Carrington as it existed before the restructuring. They don't know the corporate structure they approved no longer exists in the form they examined. She folded her hands on the desk. "The plan is elegant, in a repellent way. Remove you, establish board control through the forged resolutions, ratify the fraudulent restructuring in today's meeting, and then present the acquisition as an internal reorganization rather than a foreign takeover. By the time federal investigators untangle the structure, the contract is signed, the assets are transferred, and the legal challenge takes years." Cole had been listening with the focused, almost clinical attention he applied to operational briefings, absorbing information, building a picture, identifying the pieces that didn't fit yet. One piece was bothering him. "The armed contractors outside," he said. "The vehicles. That's not a financial operation." Miranda met his eyes. "No. That's a contingency." "Yes. For what?" Miranda was quiet for a moment, not evasive, gathering herself. "There are currently 34 people in the boardroom on the 20th floor," she said. "As of approximately 45 minutes ago, the exits from that room were controlled by personnel who do not work for this company. The official board members are present, so are 6 people I cannot account for. They appear in today's attendance log as advisors to Mr. Locke, and their security badges were issued yesterday through the executive access system." She looked at Evelyn. "Adrian has the override codes for the 20th floor security system. He can lock those doors from his office." "He's holding them," Cole said. "As leverage." "Yes. If the board ratification proceeds as planned, the people in that room walk out unharmed. If it doesn't—" Miranda stopped. She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. Evelyn had gone very still, the kind of stillness that Cole recognized as a person holding themselves together by decision rather than ease. Her hands were clasped in front of her on the desk, and she was staring at a point somewhere past Miranda's shoulder, and Cole could see her working through it. The betrayal, the scale of it, the 11 years of trust that had been quietly weaponized against everything she'd built. And he could also see the moment when she moved past that and got to the part that mattered right now. "What do we have?" she asked. "What can we actually use?" Miranda tapped the manila folder. "I have printed copies of what I've found, forged resolutions, wire transfer records, the modified restructuring agreements with the original versions for comparison. But the primary evidence is on the company's internal servers. There's a hardened archive system on the 35th floor, a data room we established during the federal vetting process. It contains the original financial records, the unmodified board documentation, every wire transfer the company has processed for the past 3 years. If we can reach it and extract the relevant files, we can provide federal investigators with a complete picture of what Adrian built." The 35th floor, Cole said. Yes. What's currently on the 35th floor? Miranda's expression answered that before her words did. I don't know. My access to the building security camera system was cut off this morning. I've been working from what I can see through my window and what two trusted staff members have been able to tell me by text. Cole stood up and walked to Miranda's window. The view faced north, which gave him a partial sight line to the front of the building. He could see one of the black SUVs, still parked, still running. A couple of pedestrians moving along the sidewalk below, oblivious, on their way to whatever ordinary Tuesday thing they were doing. 34 people in a locked boardroom. Armed contractors on unknown floors. A CEO who hadn't hesitated when he'd told her to trust him. A general counsel who had spent weeks building a paper trail at considerable personal risk. And the clock showing 9:52 a.m., 68 minutes until the board meeting was scheduled to begin. Cole turned away from the window. Okay, he said. We need to talk about what's actually possible in the next hour. Evelyn looked at him. I'm not leaving this building without my people. I know. He said it simply, without pushback, because he'd already understood that about her, and arguing the point would be a waste of time. I'm not suggesting you do. I'm saying we need to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish and in what order, because if we get the sequence wrong, we lose everything. He pulled his chair around and sat facing them both. Miranda, the boardroom exits. They're locked from Adrian's office system, you said. Is there any other way to release them? Miranda considered. The 20th floor has an independent emergency evacuation protocol. Fire suppression, emergency lighting, automatic door release. If the emergency system is triggered separately from the main building systems, through the floor's own control panel, the boardroom exits would unlock automatically as part of the evacuation sequence. Where's the control panel? Emergency control station on the 20th floor, east stairwell landing, behind a locked cabinet. What's the key situation? Miranda opened her desk drawer again and this time produced a small steel key on a numbered tag. Emergency systems maintenance. I pulled it from the facilities manager's office on Friday. I told him I needed to verify the floor inspection records. She set it on the desk. I've been sitting here for 3 days trying to figure out how to use it without getting killed. Cole picked up the key. Evelyn was watching him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Not quite trust, not quite skepticism, something in between that was doing its honest work. You're thinking we go to 35 first. Get the evidence. Then 20. Evidence first, because if we trigger the evacuation before we have the files, Adrian knows the plan has changed and he has options. Maybe he pulls the contractors out. Maybe he destroys records. Maybe this whole thing disappears into lawyers and denial and nothing sticks. Cole set the key down. But if we get to that server room first, copy what we need, then trigger the evacuation, he's already lost. The leverage collapses and the evidence is out of his reach. You're assuming we can get to 35 without being stopped. I'm assuming it's going to be ugly. A silence settled over the room. Miranda was looking at the folder in front of her. Evelyn was looking at Cole. Through the wall, muffled by distance, Cole thought he could hear voices somewhere below. Movement, activity that had a particular quality of organization to it. They're tightening the floors, he said. Miranda looked up. What does that mean? It means they're narrowing the areas that aren't yet controlled. They'll start with the executive floors and work down, probably. The longer we sit here, the fewer options we have. He looked at Evelyn. This is your building, your company, your call. I'll tell you what I think we can realistically do and what the risks are, but the decision is yours. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Cole noticed, not for the first time, that she didn't reach for certainty she didn't have. She sat with the difficulty of the decision and thought it through without performing confidence or collapsing into panic, which was rarer than people assumed and harder than it looked. Tell me the risks, she said. 35 is 15 floors up. We don't know what's there. We go up blind, through maintenance access where we can, and we deal with whatever we find. He paused. I'll be honest, I'm one person. I'm not armed. If there are more than 2 or 3 contractors between us in that server room, it gets complicated. Complicated meaning? Meaning I figure something out and it probably hurts. Something crossed Evelyn's face. Not quite a smile, not quite horror. You say that very calmly. I've said worse things calmly. She looked at Miranda. Can you stay here? Keep building the paper record of everything we found. Make sure the physical copies are somewhere secure. Miranda nodded immediately. I have a fireproof cabinet behind the bookcase. I'll put everything in it. And I still have one staff member I trust, Delia, on the 24th floor. I can get a message to her to be ready to receive files if you can push anything from 35 to my network. Which brings us to the next problem, Cole said. We need a way to get the files out of the server room. Is there a direct network connection between the 35th floor data room and your system here? Through the company intranet, yes, but Adrian's people have likely compromised internal communications. Is there a physical connection? A hard line that isn't routed through the central system? Miranda thought for a moment. The data room has an independent fiber connection. It was installed during the federal vetting process, a dedicated line to comply with government security protocols. It bypasses the main intranet entirely. Where does it terminate? There's a secure terminal in the data room itself, and she stopped, turning to her own laptop and typing quickly. There's a secondary terminal, Legal Affairs 22nd floor, East Wing. She looked up. This wing. 2 offices down from this one. Cole looked at Evelyn. If we can access the data room on 35 and push the files through the dedicated line, you can receive them here, Evelyn said. Without Adrian's people knowing the transfer is happening, Miranda added. The dedicated line isn't on any system they'd be monitoring. It exists specifically to be invisible to the main network. Cole stood up. He wasn't the kind of person who paced when he thought. He'd spent too many years in small spaces where pacing wasn't an option, but he stood and moved to the window again, looking out, thinking through the shape of what they were planning. The SUV was still there. A second one had moved, repositioned, tighter to the service entrance. Someone was adjusting the containment. 62 minutes. All right, he said. He turned back to the room. Here's what we're doing. Miranda stays here, secures the physical evidence, establishes the receive terminal for the data transfer. Evelyn and I go up to 35 through maintenance access. We reach the server room, we access the financial records, we push everything relevant through the dedicated line to Miranda's terminal. Then we come back down to 20 and trigger the emergency evacuation to release the boardroom. He paused. Questions, problems, things I'm missing. Evelyn said, What do we do if we can't reach the server room? Then we focus entirely on the boardroom evacuation and hope Miranda's physical documentation is enough to create a legal case. And if we're caught before we reach 35? Cole looked at her steadily. Then we've made the situation worse, and I'll owe you an apology. That's not reassuring. No, he agreed. It's not. Miranda stood and opened the bottom drawer of her desk, producing a small first aid kit, which she held out to Cole with an expression that managed to be both practical and somewhat grim. You may need this. Cole took it. He looked at the kit for a second, then looked at Miranda. You've been sitting on all of this for 3 days. Yes. That must have been a fairly miserable 3 days. Miranda's mouth curved very slightly. I've had worse. He tucked the kit inside his jacket. Then he turned to Evelyn, who was already standing, portfolio gone. She'd left it on the desk. Jacket gone, phone clipped to the inside of her waistband where it was accessible but not visible. She had undone her hair entirely now, pulled it back in a simple tie she'd produced from somewhere, and there was something different in her posture from the woman he'd met 40 minutes ago in the hallway. Still the same person. Still clearly someone who ran a company and knew exactly what she was doing, but the performance of authority had been stripped away, and what was left was something tighter and more focused. She looked at Cole and said, I want you to know, if we get out of this, I'm going to write you the largest consulting check you've ever seen. Let's get out of it first. She moved to the door. Cole got there first, because that was how they were doing this, and she'd already stopped arguing about it, and put his hand on the knob. Miranda, Evelyn said without turning around, keep your door locked. Obviously, said Miranda Shaw. Cole opened the door. The corridor was still empty. The ventilation was still humming. Somewhere in the building, 34 people were locked in a room waiting for a board meeting to start, and a man who'd been trusted for 11 years was betting his entire future on the assumption that nobody would reach the 35th floor in time to stop him. Cole and Evelyn moved into the corridor and turned toward the maintenance access. Behind them, Miranda's door clicked shut and locked. They moved quickly, without speaking, Cole reading the hallway ahead with the particular quality of attention that was less like watchfulness and more like a kind of listening. Not just ears, but the whole body registering the space, the air, the quality of silence in it. The maintenance access point was at the end of the east corridor, marked by a door that looked identical to a utility closet, except for the emergency system's keypad mounted beside it. Cole used Evelyn's executive access card. The door opened. Beyond it was a narrow concrete shaft with another service ladder, this one running both up and down, with intermediate landings marked by floor numbers stenciled in orange paint. Cole looked up. 35 was 13 floors above. "Can you climb 13 floors?" he asked, not unkindly. "I run 5 miles every other morning," Evelyn said. "I'll keep up." They started climbing. The shaft was cold and close, and the sounds of the building reached them in strange, filtered ways. The bass vibration of elevator machinery, the distant percussion of something heavy being moved on an unseen floor, once what might have been raised voices somewhere above them before it was swallowed by distance and concrete. Cole counted the landings. 23, 24, 25. His shoulder was fine. His knees were fine. His mind was running 3 tracks simultaneously. The immediate task, what might be waiting above them, and the exits from the building if everything collapsed before they reached the server room. Evelyn climbed steadily behind him. She didn't ask for breaks. She didn't talk. Somewhere around the 29th floor, Cole heard her breathing change. She was working harder, but she hadn't slowed, and he felt, incongruously, a flicker of something that wasn't admiration exactly, but was in the neighborhood. 32, 33, 34. Cole stopped at the 34 landing and held up a hand. Evelyn stopped below him. He listened. Above them, on the 35th floor landing, there were voices. 2 men, close together. The conversation was low, worn. They weren't worried about being overheard, and Cole could catch fragments without being able to resolve the words. A short exchange. Then silence. Then one of them said something and the other made a sound that might have been a short laugh. Cole looked down at Evelyn. He held up 2 fingers. She looked at him steadily and gave a small nod. Cole gripped the ladder rail and thought, for roughly half a second, about Rachel. Not morbidly, not as a signal of anything, just the way the mind sometimes produces a face at the moment before something difficult. Haley's face came too, and his stomach did the particular thing it did when he thought about the fact that his daughter's entire remaining family was currently climbing a maintenance shaft in a building that might be actively dangerous. He pushed it down. He climbed the last ladder section and came through the access panel into whatever was waiting on the other side. One of the contractors was close, much closer than Cole had expected, standing with his back to the access panel in a position that suggested he was watching the main corridor rather than the service access, which was a mistake. People always underestimated the service access. Cole came through fast and low, and the fight that followed was brief and ugly and not something that would have looked good filmed. No clean choreography, just 2 people in a confined space trying to end the situation before the second person could react, which Cole managed, barely, because the second man was starting to move by the time Cole finished with the first. Cole took a forearm across his left shoulder that was going to hurt significantly later, and he caught the second man in a way that controlled rather than damaged, pressing him against the wall with enough force to make the choice obvious. "Down," Cole said. Very quiet. Very clear. The man went down. Cole looked up. The corridor ahead of them was empty. He turned back to the access panel. Evelyn was already coming through, moving fast, eyes wide but jaw set. She looked at the 2 men on the floor, both of them conscious, both of them restrained. Cole had used their own equipment. And she looked at Cole. His shoulder was already stiffening. He didn't mention it. "Server room," he said. "Which way?" Evelyn oriented herself, looked left, looked right, and pointed. "West end, the door with the biometric panel." "Your access card?" "Executive emergency access opens everything," she said. "I told you. I know every door in this building." They moved west along the corridor. The server room door was where she said it was, heavy and gray with a biometric panel that accepted the executive card and asked for a secondary code. Evelyn entered it without hesitation, 8 digits, fast and certain, and the locks disengaged with a heavy, satisfying sound. Inside was cold and loud with the white noise of server racks and cooling systems. Rows of black towers humming with the stored weight of everything Carrington Strategic Technologies had ever recorded. Along the back wall, 3 workstations and the terminal Miranda had described, marked with a small federal compliance placard and a dedicated fiber indicator showing active connection. Evelyn sat down at the terminal. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at them for a moment with an expression of pure functional irritation, her hands shaking at her own hands. And then she started typing. Cole positioned himself at the door, watching the corridor through the narrow window in it, listening. "How long?" he asked. "The files I need are archived by date range. I have to locate the original financials, the unmodified board documentation, and the wire transfer records." She was typing fast, navigating with the confidence of someone who'd worked in this system. 10 minutes, maybe 12. Cole checked his watch. 41 minutes until 11 o'clock. Outside in the corridor, nothing moved yet. Evelyn typed and Cole watched the door, and the servers hummed around them with the indifferent persistence of machines that didn't know or care that something very large was being decided in the cold room they occupied. And the building held its breath around them, and somewhere 15 floors below, Miranda Shaw sat with a locked door and a fireproof cabinet, and the particular courage of a person who has decided to do the right thing and is simply waiting to see whether it costs them everything. The transfer took 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Cole knew because he counted, not obsessively, just the way he'd always counted things that mattered, the same way he used to count heartbeats during a dive or footsteps in a dark corridor. Evelyn worked at the terminal with a focused efficiency that reminded him of surgeons he'd known in the field, people who got very quiet and very precise when the stakes climbed high enough to make most people shake apart. Her hands had stopped trembling somewhere around the 3rd minute. She didn't comment on it, neither did he. The files moved through the dedicated fiber line in batches. Wire transfer records first, then the original board resolutions, then the modified restructuring agreements with their corrupted versions alongside the originals for direct comparison, then 14 months of internal communications between Adrian Locke and a series of email addresses that resolved, with enough digging, to Vantage Meridian Group entities registered in Luxembourg and Singapore. Evelyn narrated quietly as she worked, not for Cole's benefit exactly, more the way people talked when the alternative was silence, and silence was worse. "This one," she said, pulling up a document, "is the restructuring agreement I signed in April. This is the version I reviewed." She opened a second file beside it. "This is the version in the official record. 17 clauses changed. The ownership transfer mechanism in Section 9 is completely different. I signed something that said the subsidiary framework would remain under board control. The version on file says effective control transfers to the managing investment partner upon board ratification." She stared at the screen for a moment. "He changed it after I signed it. He had my signature and he just changed it." Cole said nothing. There wasn't anything useful to say. 11 years, Evelyn said. Then she went back to typing. By the time the last batch transferred, Cole had repositioned twice in response to sounds in the corridor, once for footsteps that passed without stopping, once for a radio transmission that crackled somewhere beyond the server room door and then went quiet. The 2 contractors he'd dealt with on the landing were still secured. That wouldn't hold indefinitely, and Cole knew it, and he calculated the margin the way he calculated everything, honestly, without rounding toward the comfortable answer. They had maybe 15 minutes before someone came looking. "Done," Evelyn said. Cole turned from the door. On the terminal screen, a transfer confirmation showed a green status indicator and a timestamp. Miranda's secondary terminal on 22 had received everything. "Miranda has it?" he asked. Evelyn was already typing a brief message through the dedicated line. Not the company intranet, the fiber connection, the one Adrian's people weren't monitoring. She hit send and waited. 4 seconds later, a response appeared on screen. "Received. All files intact. Delia has hard copies printing now. Federal Contracts Liaison reached by landline. They are aware. Stay safe." Cole read the last 2 words and felt something that wasn't quite warmth but was adjacent to it. Miranda Shaw had been sitting alone in that office for 3 days carrying this, and she'd still thought to add "stay safe" at the end of a message during an active crisis. Some people were built a particular way. "She got through to the Federal Liaison," Evelyn said. She exhaled slowly. "That means someone outside this building knows what's happening." "Which changes the equation," Cole said. "Adrian's window just got a lot smaller. If federal contacts are aware, he can't let this drag out. He needs the board ratification to happen in..." Cole checked his watch. 26 minutes. Evelyn stood up. She'd been sitting for 11 minutes and her body showed it. She stretched her back once, quickly, the unself-conscious movement of someone who'd forgotten Cole was watching. Then we need to move. The boardroom evacuation, 20th floor emergency control panel, east stairwell landing. Cole moved to the door, checked the window. Corridor still clear, but not for long. We go down through maintenance, fast. How fast? Faster than you're thinking. They went. The descent through the service shaft was harder than the climb, which was always the way. Knees taking more than the climb. The urgency making the rungs feel smaller and farther apart. Cole went first again, setting the pace, and Evelyn matched it without being asked. 26, 25, 24. The building around them felt different now. There was more activity in it, more vibration, the sense of an organism whose systems were running hot. At the 23rd floor landing, Cole heard radio traffic again, clearer this time, two voices talking in clipped shorthand. He pressed against the wall of the shaft, and Evelyn pressed beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her arm against his. The voices faded. They kept moving. 22, 21. At the 20th floor landing, Cole stopped and pressed his ear to the access panel. Beyond it, the east stairwell landing, where the emergency control cabinet should be. He could hear nothing immediate. He eased the panel open. The stairwell was empty. The emergency control cabinet was exactly where Miranda had described, recessed into the wall beside the stairwell door, painted the same industrial gray as everything else on this floor, marked with a small placard reading, "Floor Emergency Systems, Authorized Personnel Only." Cole produced the steel key Miranda had given him and found the lock on the first try. The cabinet swung open. Inside was a panel of switches and indicators, clearly labeled, "Emergency Lighting, Fire Suppression, Evacuation Protocol, Door Release." Cole looked at Evelyn. "Once I trigger this, the boardroom exits unlock and the evacuation alarm sounds. Everyone in that building is going to know something is happening." "Good," she said, "including Adrian's contractors." "Also good." She met his eyes. "My people have been locked in that room for almost an hour. Trigger it." Cole flipped the evacuation switch. The alarm was immediate and loud, a pulsing electronic tone that filled the stairwell, and, from the sound of it, every corridor on the floor simultaneously. The indicator panel showed a cascade of green lights as the automatic systems engaged. Emergency lighting activated, evacuation routes illuminated, and most importantly, the door release mechanism unlocked every secured exit on the 20th floor in a single automatic sequence. From somewhere beyond the stairwell door, muffled but unmistakable, they heard it. Voices, movement, the specific chaotic sound of 34 people who had been locked in a room suddenly discovering the door would open. Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. "The boardroom," she said. "There's a satellite conferencing system in there. Independent, not connected to the building's main communications. If I can reach it, you can broadcast the evidence to federal investigators directly," Cole finished. "The files are on Miranda's terminal. If Miranda can push them to the satellite system's upload address. You need to get to the room and get the system active before Adrian's people realize what's happening and shut it down." Cole was already moving toward the stairwell door. "How long to get the system running?" 2 minutes to initiate, another 3 or 4 to complete a full file transmission. 5 minutes, Cole said. "We need 5 minutes in that room." He pushed through the stairwell door. The 20th floor corridor was chaos in the organized, human way that chaos actually looked. Not the dramatic version, but the real one, which was mostly people moving fast in multiple directions with expressions of fear and confusion, some clutching laptops or phones, some trying to help others. The evacuation alarm making conversation difficult, and everyone slightly louder than they meant to be. Cole and Evelyn moved through it against the flow, toward the boardroom at the corridor's west end, and Cole was tracking the wrong kinds of movement in the crowd. The people who weren't evacuating, the people who were moving with purpose in the wrong direction. He counted 3 of them before they reached the boardroom door. The boardroom itself was emptying. Most of the 34 people were already filing toward the emergency exits, streaming past Cole and Evelyn with the urgent, grateful energy of people who had just been let out of something very small. One woman grabbed Evelyn's arm as she passed. "Ms. Carrington, what's happening? Are you—" "Get out of the building," Evelyn said, firmly and clearly. "Use the emergency stairs. Don't use the elevators. Go." The woman went. Inside the boardroom, most people had cleared. At the far end of the long conference table, the satellite conferencing system occupied a dedicated station, a compact unit with a dish uplink indicator and a touch interface, installed during the federal contract vetting process as a secure communications backup. Beside it, one man remained in the room who had no business being there. I was standing at the head of the table with the particular stillness of a man who had expected this moment and had been rehearsing for it. He was somewhere in his mid-60s, broad through the shoulders, with silver hair worn short and the kind of face that had probably been commanding in boardrooms for decades. The face of a man who was accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room he entered. He wore a charcoal suit and no tie, and his hands were clasped in front of him on the table in a gesture that was probably meant to project calm, but landed somewhere closer to braced. Cole knew immediately who he was. Malcolm Vane. The name had come up in Miranda's briefing, the senior executive secretly directing the acquisition, the man above Adrian in the structure, the person who had engineered the entire 14-month operation from a position carefully insulated from the visible mechanics. Cole had formed an impression of him from the description. The reality was close enough. Vane looked at Evelyn with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite admiration, something that lived uncomfortably between the two. "Evelyn," he said, "I have to say, I didn't expect this." "Yes, you did," Evelyn said. She was already moving toward the satellite station. "You just didn't expect it to work." Vane's eyes moved to Cole with the quick, professional assessment of a man who understood threat evaluation. "And you brought help." "He found me," Evelyn said. "Sit down, Malcolm." "I don't think I will." Vane's voice was steady, the voice of someone who had not yet accepted that the situation had changed. "You understand what you're doing here. The restructuring agreements are filed. The board resolution is on record. You can make this very complicated, or you can allow today's meeting to conclude as planned, and the transition will be handled." "With everyone in the boardroom still locked inside," Evelyn said. "That was a precautionary measure. Nobody was harmed. It was a hostage situation." She reached the satellite station and began working the touch interface. "Call it what it was." Vane took one step toward her. Cole moved between them without hurrying, and Vane stopped. He looked at Cole the way powerful men looked at obstacles, calculating, annoyed, searching for the negotiation. "You're not law enforcement," Vane said. "No," Cole agreed. "Then you have no authority here." "I'm not here for authority." Cole kept his voice conversational. "I'm here so she has time to finish what she's doing." Behind Cole, he could hear Evelyn working the interface, the soft percussion of a touchscreen, the tone of a system initializing. And from the corridor beyond the boardroom doors, he could hear something else. The evacuation noise had shifted. Fewer civilian voices, more of the other kind of movement. They were coming. "Miranda," Evelyn said, not loudly. She had her phone out, using the satellite system's own network connection, the one that bypassed the building's compromised communications entirely. "I'm at the console. Initiate the transfer to the upload address. I'm sending you the credentials now." A pause. Then Miranda's voice through the phone, slightly compressed by the connection. "Credentials received. Starting transfer. Evelyn. There are people moving on the security cameras that Delia just restored access to. They're heading toward the 20th floor." "I know," Evelyn said. "How long for the transfer?" 4 minutes. Maybe 3.5 if the satellite handshake is clean." Cole heard the boardroom door behind him open. He turned. 2 contractors came through the door fast and with purpose. And Cole understood in the first half-second that these were not the same caliber as the men on the 35th floor landing. These 2 moved like professionals, which meant the next 30 seconds were going to be significantly harder than the last encounter. Cole put himself between them and Evelyn, and did the thing he'd spent 12 years training to do in situations where the geometry was bad and the numbers were against him. He made himself the entire problem. What followed wasn't clean. It never was. Cole took an elbow across his left cheekbone in the first 5 seconds that split the skin just below his eye and sent a bright cascade of pain across his vision, and he absorbed it and kept moving because stopping was worse. He used the conference table as a barrier, used the chairs as obstacles, used the room itself the way he'd been taught to use every environment, not as a stage but as a tool. The first man went down when Cole redirected his own momentum into the table's edge in a way that was more physics than force. The second was harder, faster, and caught Cole across the right shoulder with something that might have been a reinforced baton or might have been his forearm, and Cole couldn't tell the difference because it produced the same result. His right arm went briefly unresponsive, and he had to finish the next 15 seconds primarily left-handed, which he was capable of, but which added a specific unpleasantness to the proceedings. Both men were down and conscious and not going anywhere useful when Cole straightened up. His lip was bleeding, his cheekbone was bleeding. His right shoulder felt like someone had inserted a hot coal into the joint and left it there. He became aware of all three of these things in quick succession, the way pain arrived after adrenaline started its retreat, first as information, then as nuisance, then as something that would need actual attention when there was time. There wasn't time yet. He turned back to Evelyn. She was still at the satellite console, and she was watching him with an expression he had no category for. It wasn't the shock he expected, or the squeamishness, or even the relief. It was something more direct than any of those, a look that acknowledged exactly what had just happened without flinching from it. 60 seconds, she said. Her voice was completely steady. Miranda says 60 seconds. Cole moved back to the door and braced it. Vane had not moved during the fight. He stood at the head of the table with his hands still clasped, and his face doing something complicated. The expression of a man watching the architecture of 5 years of planning come apart at a speed he hadn't prepared for. When Cole looked at him, Vane's jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing the calculation that eyes did when they were searching for the exit from a situation that no longer had one. "It's done, Malcolm," Cole said. It wasn't unkind. It was just accurate. Vane said nothing. From the console, a tone, clean and sustained, the sound of a completed transmission. "It's through," Evelyn said. She exhaled once, hard. "Everything, all of it, wire transfers, forged resolutions, modified agreements, Vantage Meridian communications. The Federal Contracts Office has received the full package." She looked at Cole. "Miranda confirmed receipt 12 seconds ago. There's a federal acknowledgement already. They had an investigative team on standby. They've been watching Vantage Meridian for 18 months. Cole looked at his watch. 10:58 a.m. 2 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin. In the corridor beyond the boardroom doors, he could hear new sounds, different from the contractors, different from the evacuating employees. The particular controlled commotion of people arriving with authority rather than force. Radios with different cadence, voices calling out with the specific vocabulary of federal law enforcement. The building's front entrance, Cole understood, had just become a very different kind of controlled. He lowered his arm from the door. Evelyn set her phone down on the satellite console and stood looking at it for a moment, her hand still resting on the edge of the unit. The transmission indicator was green, completed, time-stamped, received. She had the posture of someone at the end of a very long run, not collapsed, not triumphant, just the plain exhaustion of a person whose body had been running entirely on decision and urgency for the past 90 minutes and was only now beginning to register what that had cost. Cole walked to the nearest chair and sat down because his shoulder was telling him to, and he'd learned at various points in his career that the body kept its own ledger and eventually presented the bill whether you were ready for it or not. The boardroom door opened. The first person through was a woman in a dark jacket with a federal badge on a lanyard, followed by 2 agents in the standard configuration of people who had arrived expecting a bad situation and were processing that it was complicated rather than active. Behind them, another agent, and behind him, moving with the quick, relieved energy of someone who had been waiting for this, Miranda Shaw. Miranda looked at Evelyn first, just looked at her, taking inventory. "You're bleeding," Miranda said to Cole without looking at him, which meant she was looking at his reflection in the boardroom's glass wall panel. "I'm aware," Cole said. "The first aid kit I gave you, still in my jacket." Miranda made a sound that was not quite exasperated and not quite fond. The lead federal agent, the woman with the badge, was already speaking to Evelyn in the measured, efficient tones of someone conducting an assessment under time pressure. Evelyn answered her questions with the same directness she'd shown all morning, walking the agent through the sequence of events in clear, sequential terms, referencing the transmitted files by their specific designations. She was good at this, Cole noted. She had the lawyer's instinct for organizing information under stress, presenting it in the order that mattered most. A second team of agents moved past Cole toward Malcolm Vane. Vane had unclenched his hands at some point during the last few minutes. He was standing with his arms at his sides now, and when the agents reached him, he didn't resist and didn't perform resignation. He simply accepted the reality of the moment with the particular dignity of a man who had known, somewhere beneath all the calculation, that this was always one of the possible outcomes. "Malcolm Vane," one of the agents said, "we need you to come with us." Vane looked one last time at Evelyn. She looked back at him. There was no satisfaction in her face. Cole noticed that. There was exhaustion, and there was something that might have been grief. Not for Vane, but for the version of events where none of this had been necessary, where 11 years of trust hadn't been built as scaffolding for a betrayal. The grief of the alternate timeline. Vane said nothing. He went with the agents. The room, once he left it, felt different. Smaller and quieter, the way rooms did when the weight had been removed from them. More agents were moving through the building now. Cole could hear the systematic sounds of law enforcement establishing control floor by floor, the particular rhythm of it familiar from a different context and a different kind of operation. The contractors outside would already be dealing with federal vehicles replacing the black SUVs on Meridian Avenue. The 2 men from the 35th floor and the 2 from the boardroom were being located and processed. Somewhere in this building, Adrian Locke was sitting in his office with the understanding settling around him like water rising, and there was nothing left for him to do with that understanding except choose how he responded to it. Cole sat in the boardroom chair and waited. His shoulder was bad. His face was worse cosmetically than structurally. The cheekbone cut had bled more than it deserved to, as face cuts did, and he was aware that he looked considerably worse than he felt, which was itself not great. He prodded the shoulder experimentally and decided it wasn't dislocated, just deeply unhappy, which was survivable. He thought about Haley. Not anxiously. The situation was resolved enough that anxiety felt like the wrong response. But the way he often thought about her when something significant had just finished, a sort of automatic check-in the mind performed. She was at school. She was fine. She was probably, at this precise moment, either struggling through the long division that had been the homework subject of the past week or negotiating with her teacher about whether long division was a skill she actually needed in the 21st century, which was an argument Haley had been refining for several days and which Cole privately thought showed more strategic thinking than the math itself. He was going to be late for pickup. He needed to call Mrs. Adler next door. The mundane logistics of the thought made him realize, in a quiet and slightly absurd way, how completely the morning had recalibrated. 90 minutes ago, he had been drinking coffee across the street. Now he was sitting in an evacuated boardroom with a split cheekbone and a compromised shoulder, surrounded by federal agents, having just helped prevent a foreign-backed corporate takeover of a major defense contractor. He was definitely going to be late for pickup. The lead agent finished her initial conversation with Evelyn and moved toward Cole, badge in hand. "Mr. Barrett, I'm Special Agent Krista Nolan. We're going to need a full statement." "I know," Cole said. "Can I make a phone call first?" Agent Nolan looked at him, at the blood on his face, at the way he was holding his right arm, and her professional composure softened exactly 1 degree. "Sure." Cole dialed Mrs. Adler. Evelyn, across the room, was giving her statement to a second agent. She had her back to Cole, but as he waited for Mrs. Adler to pick up, Evelyn turned and looked at him. Not for any specific reason, not to communicate anything in particular, just the way people looked across rooms at the people who had been through something with them. A taking stock. A confirmation that the other person was still there. Cole met her eyes. She looked at his face, the cut, the blood, and her expression did a small, complicated thing. Then Mrs. Adler picked up, and Cole turned his attention to explaining, in the calmest voice he could manage, that he was going to be a bit delayed this afternoon, and Haley would need to come home with her after school. And yes, he was fine, and no, she didn't need to worry, and yes, he'd explain later. When he hung up, Evelyn was still giving her statement, and Agent Nolan was standing beside Cole with a patience that suggested she had dealt with more than one person making domestic arrangements in the middle of a federal incident. "Ready?" Nolan asked. "Yeah," Cole said. He stood up. His shoulder protested with the specific eloquence of something that had been hit hard with a hard thing. "Ready." They moved toward the corridor, and behind them the boardroom satellite console sat with its transmission indicator still glowing green, and the files it had sent were already being processed in federal offices across the city. and 14 months of carefully constructed fraud was coming apart in the clean, systematic way that evidence always dismantled things when it was complete enough, and the people holding it were finally able to use it. Outside the building, on Meridian Avenue, the black SUVs were gone. Federal vehicles had taken their place. The morning, pale and overcast as it had started, had moved into early afternoon without Cole noticing, the way time moved when you were too busy to track it. Somewhere in the building, on a floor below, Adrian Locke was being read his rights. And on the street outside, ordinary people were walking past the building on their ordinary Tuesday errands, aware that something had happened. The police tape, the federal vehicles, the unusual activity, but not yet aware of the scale of it, the way the public was always slightly behind events still in the process of becoming news. Cole walked out of the boardroom and down the corridor toward the federal staging area that had been established near the main stairwell, and his right arm hurt and his face hurt, and he was going to need 3 or 4 hours of federal statement giving before he could go home, and he was fine with all of that. The building was controlled, the people were out, the evidence was transmitted, everything else was what came after. The federal statement took 4 hours and 17 minutes. Cole knew because at some point during the second hour, he had started tracking the time the same way he tracked everything during long operations. Not impatiently, just as orientation, a way of knowing where he was in the shape of things. Special Agent Nolan was thorough, which Cole respected, and she had a habit of circling back to details he thought they'd already finished with, which he also respected even when it was tedious, because the details she circled back to were always the ones that actually mattered. They sat in a temporary interview space that the federal team had established in one of the 22nd floor conference rooms, not Miranda's office, which was being processed as an evidence site, but the room 2 doors down, which had a rectangular table and 8 chairs and a window that looked north over Meridian Avenue. Cole sat across from Nolan with his jacket off and his right sleeve pushed up, a field dressing on his cheekbone that one of the federal medical staff had applied with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done it in worse conditions. His shoulder had been examined, pronounced not dislocated, and wrapped in a compression bandage that helped approximately 30%, which was 30% better than nothing. He walked Nolan through everything: the diner across the street, the SUVs, the lobby, the service access ladder, Miranda's office, the server room on 35, the emergency evacuation panel, the boardroom. He was precise and chronological, and he didn't editorialize, which Nolan seemed to appreciate because she didn't have to ask him to slow down or stay on point. He'd given enough operational debriefs in his Navy career that the format was comfortable, and this was, in its essential structure, a debrief, a reconstruction of what had happened in the order it had happened, for the benefit of people who needed to understand it fully. When he finished, Nolan looked at her notes for a long moment. "You crossed the street," she said. Not a question, just restating it. "Yes." Because the SUVs were running, and the guard's positioning was wrong. Nolan looked up from her notes. Most people don't notice that. Most people weren't Navy SEALs for 12 years. She studied him with the focused, neutral expression of a federal agent who had learned not to show her reactions during interviews. "Mr. Barrett, what you did in this building today, the server room, the evacuation panel, the boardroom, you understand that several of those actions involved significant personal risk, and in the case of the contractors, direct physical confrontation. I understand that. And you're a private citizen, a security consultant with no official involvement in this case, no law enforcement authority, no federal mandate of any kind. Also correct. So I have to ask the obvious question." Cole looked at her steadily. "You want to know why I didn't just call the police from across the street?" "I want to know why you didn't just call the police from across the street." He thought about how to answer that, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the true answer had layers, and not all of them were easy to explain to someone who hadn't lived the specific combination of experiences that had produced it. He thought about Rachel. He thought about Haley. "I thought about the particular weight of standing by while something bad happened because you'd calculated that involvement was too costly. I called 911 from the diner," he said, "before I crossed. The dispatcher took the report and told me to stay on the line. I gave her the vehicle descriptions and my position, and I stayed on the line for 3 minutes. Then she told me officers would be dispatched and I should remain where I was." He paused. The problem was the timeline. The board meeting was at 11. The vehicles were already staged. If the building went into lockdown before any official response arrived, 34 people were going to be inside a controlled environment with no way out, and nobody from the outside who understood the interior layout well enough to do anything about it quickly. He looked at Nolan. I know what I can do. I know what I can do faster than a response team that doesn't know the building. That's not arrogance. That's just an accurate assessment. Nolan wrote something in her notes. Also, Cole added, I was already across the street before I finished calculating all of that. Something shifted in Nolan's expression. Not a smile exactly. She was too professional for that in an interview context. But a small change in the quality of her attention. Off the record. Sure. Good call. She closed her notebook. Officially, your actions today will require a review by our legal team and the U.S. Attorney's Office regarding the confrontations with the contracted personnel. Given the circumstances and the outcome, I don't anticipate that review producing anything actionable, but I want you to be aware it's a procedural requirement. Understood? You'll need to be available for follow-up interviews as the investigation develops. I'll be available. Nolan stood and extended her hand. Cole shook it with his left hand because his right was still running at reduced capacity, and Nolan accepted this without comment. He found Evelyn in the corridor outside. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, not anxiously, but with the flat tiredness of someone whose body had decided it was done performing and was now simply existing. Her hair had come loose from the tie at some point in the last hour, and she'd stopped caring about it. There was a faint bruise forming along her left forearm that Cole hadn't noticed before. She'd caught something on the service access ladder, probably, or in the boardroom corridor and hadn't mentioned it. He looked at it and she followed his gaze. It's nothing, she said. I know, I wasn't going to say anything. She looked at his face, the dressing on his cheekbone, the tension in the way he was holding his right side. How's the shoulder? Functional. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. She almost smiled. Almost. Her face was too tired to complete the full arc of it, but the beginning was there. Miranda is with the evidence team. She's been in there for 2 hours walking them through every document. She told me she'd been rehearsing it for 3 days. Evelyn paused. She knew she might not survive discovering this. If Adrian had found out before today, but he didn't. No. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The corridor was busy around them, agents moving, staff members being interviewed in various rooms, the persistent controlled activity of a federal operation in its early hours. They have Adrian in custody. He was in his office when the agents arrived. He didn't run. She said it like she was still working out what to do with that information. His assistant said he was just sitting at his desk, not doing anything, just sitting. Cole thought about that. Maybe he'd been sitting there since he realized it wasn't going to work. Maybe. Evelyn uncrossed her arms and straightened up. He hasn't spoken yet. His lawyer arrived 20 minutes ago. She looked at the wall across from her, unfocused, not seeing the wall exactly. I keep thinking about the first time I hired him. He came in with a portfolio of financial restructuring work he'd done for a company in Atlanta. 3 days after I hired him, he found an error in our quarterly audit that saved us $800,000. I thought... She stopped. You thought he was exactly what he seemed, Cole said. For 11 years I thought that. 11 years is a long time to maintain a deception. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be accurate. He looked at her directly. You trusted someone who was professionally committed to being trustworthy. That's not a failure of judgment. That's a failure of his character. Evelyn looked at him for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once, processing what he'd said, deciding whether she believed it, measuring him in some way he couldn't fully read. You say things very plainly. It's a habit. I don't mean it as a criticism. I know. She pushed off the wall. I need to get back to the legal team. There's a federal contracts liaison who flew in from Washington. They want to understand the exact timeline of the restructuring modifications before they make any decisions about the contract status. She paused. That's going to be a long conversation. Go, Cole said. She took 2 steps, then stopped and turned back. Cole. She said at his name like she was checking that it was the right word for what she wanted to say. Thank you doesn't cover it. I know that. I don't have the right word for what this actually was. You don't need one right now, he said. She looked at him for another moment. That same direct measuring quality he'd noticed in the boardroom. The look that didn't ask for anything, but didn't pretend either. Then she turned and walked down the corridor toward the legal team. And Cole watched her go, and the building continued its long procedural work of becoming evidence around them. He called Mrs. Adler again to confirm he'd be even later than he'd thought, found a chair in an unused conference room, and sat with the lights off for 20 minutes, which was not sleep and was not quite rest, but was the closest his body was going to get to either for the foreseeable future. The next 3 weeks were, in their own way, as exhausting as the day itself. The federal investigation moved at the pace investigations moved, thorough, methodical, impervious to anyone's schedule or preferences. Cole gave 3 additional statements over the first 10 days, each one covering different aspects of the events in more specific detail as the federal team built their case from the evidence outward. He cooperated fully and without complaint, because cooperation was simply correct, and also because Nolan had been straight with him and he returned the courtesy. His shoulder healed faster than expected and slower than he wanted, which was the normal rate for things healing. The cheekbone cut closed cleanly. The bruising around it went through the standard yellow-green progression that Haley found alternately fascinating and concerning, and which prompted her on the 3rd day to bring home a library book about the human circulatory system that she read with the focused intensity she applied to subjects that had caught her genuine interest. Cole ate dinner and let her explain bruising to him at length, and the evening was, in its small and ordinary way, one of the better evenings he'd had in recent memory. He didn't tell Haley much about what had happened. She was 9, and the specifics were not appropriate for 9, and also he was still processing them himself, which was a thing he didn't say out loud but which was true. He told her he'd helped someone at work, and it had taken longer than expected, and he'd gotten a little banged up. Haley accepted this with the pragmatic trust of a child who had grown up with a father who occasionally came home from jobs with minor injuries, and who had learned that the important information was whether he was okay and whether he'd be there for dinner. He was okay. He was there for dinner. That was enough. The news coverage began on the 3rd day and built steadily through the first 2 weeks. The story had the particular combination of elements that made journalists want to write about it, and they wrote about it extensively. A 30-year-old CEO, a $12 billion federal contract, 14 months of sophisticated fraud, a foreign-backed investment consortium, 34 people locked in a boardroom. Cole's name appeared in the coverage early, described variously as a security consultant, a former Navy SEAL, and, in one outlet's particularly creative formulation, a passerby who happened to be a special operations veteran. He found this last description both accurate and slightly absurd, which seemed about right. His phone got busy in ways it hadn't been before. 3 separate law firms contacted him about potential consulting work. 2 security companies left messages about employment opportunities. A journalist from a national publication asked if he'd be willing to do a profile interview, which he declined, because the profile interview would require him to talk about himself at length for publication, and he found the concept uncomfortable in a way that was difficult to explain to people who had never found talking about themselves uncomfortable. Haley found out about the news coverage at school, which was predictable. One of her classmates had seen a story online. Haley came home that day with a different quality of quiet than usual. Not upset, not excited, working something through. She waited until after dinner, when they were doing the dishes together the way they always did, Cole washing and Haley drying, which was their system and had been since she was 7. "Dad," she said. She was drying a plate with the methodical care she brought to tasks she was actually thinking about rather than just performing. "The thing you helped with. Was it dangerous?" Cole handed her another plate. "Some of it." "How dangerous?" He thought about how to answer honestly without answering more than she needed. "Dangerous enough that I paid attention." Haley dried the plate, set it in the cabinet, took the next one. "Were you scared?" "Yes," Cole said, which was true, though the fear had been the operational kind, background, useful, converted into attention rather than paralysis. "But yes." "A little." "But you did it anyway." "Yes." Haley thought about this. The water ran between them. Outside the kitchen window, the street was doing its ordinary evening things. A neighbor walking a dog, the yellow square of a lit window across the way, ordinary life in its ordinary configurations. "Mom would have said that's just you," Haley said finally. Cole turned off the water. He stood at the sink for a moment with the dish towel in his hands, not doing anything with it, just standing. "Yeah," he said. "She probably would have." Haley took the dish towel from him without ceremony, dried the last pan herself, and then went to do her homework, and Cole stood at the kitchen sink for another minute before following her. And the evening closed around them the way evenings did, quietly, without announcement, just the ordinary accumulation of minutes becoming a day, becoming the past. The legal proceedings moved faster than Cole expected, which Nolan told him was attributable to the quality and completeness of the evidence. The federal case against Vantage Meridian Group was, according to the coverage he followed with half his attention, extensive enough that the defense attorneys were reportedly spending most of their early energy on damage limitation rather than actual defense. Malcolm Vane's legal team filed several motions in the first 2 weeks, all of which were declined. The foreign entities connected to Vantage Meridian were referred to international investigative partners. Adrian Locke did what cornered people with lawyers sometimes did when the evidence was comprehensive enough. He negotiated. The word came through Nolan on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the events in the building. Adrian had agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors in exchange for sentencing consideration. The cooperation included detailed accounting of the entire 14-month operation, identification of all Vantage Meridian contacts and communication channels, and documentation of 2 previous acquisitions, the aerospace components firm in 2019 and the communications infrastructure company in 2021, that investigators had suspected but never fully untangled. Cole received this information and sat with it for a while. He didn't feel satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction implied that something had been resolved, and what Adrian's cooperation actually represented was the beginning of a very long legal process rather than the end of anything. But there was a quality of rightness to it, not triumph, just rightness. The kind of feeling that came when a complicated thing landed where it should. He called Haley's school and rescheduled a parent-teacher conference he'd had to postpone twice already, and then he made dinner. Evelyn called on a Friday evening, 5 weeks after the incident. Cole was at his kitchen table going through a contract proposal for a new client, a regional hospital system that wanted a comprehensive security audit, when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer because unfamiliar numbers in the past month had been a mixed experience. He answered on the 3rd ring. "It's Evelyn," she said. "Carrington, in case you have many Evelyns calling." "I don't," Cole said. "How are you?" "Functional?" A pause. "That's the answer I have right now." He recognized his own words and something shifted in his chest. Small, unannounced. That's a reasonable answer. The contract liaison from Washington called this afternoon. They've completed their initial review of the company structure in light of the investigation findings. She paused again, and he could hear in the pause the particular weight of someone about to deliver news they've been waiting for. They're not suspending the federal contract, Cole. They're proceeding. It'll take another review cycle, probably 90 days, before it's officially ratified under the new board structure. But the assessment is that the company itself is sound, and the fraud was external to the core operations. Cole set down his pen. That's good news. It's the best news I've had in 5 weeks. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath the steadiness, relief doing its quiet, massive work. I wanted you to know. I don't know. I thought you deserved to know it worked. You did the work, Cole said. I held the door. You held it at considerable personal cost. The shoulder's fine. I wasn't talking about the shoulder. A beat. I was talking about what it cost you to be in that building instead of with your daughter. Cole was quiet for a moment. The contract proposal sat on the table in front of him. Through the hallway, from Haley's room, he could hear the low sound of her reading aloud to herself, which she did sometimes when a book had a particular rhythm she wanted to feel in her mouth. She was fine, Cole said. I know, but you didn't know that for certain while you were in the building. No, he admitted. I didn't. Another pause, longer this time, with a different quality than the functional pauses of someone choosing their words carefully. I'd like to take you to dinner, Evelyn said. Not a company event, not a formal thank you, just dinner, if that's something you'd want. She said it cleanly, without extra weight or apology, the way she said most things. I understand if it's not. Cole looked at the contract proposal on his table. He looked at the hallway where Haley's voice moved through the quiet house. He looked at the window where October had given way to November, and the street outside was darker earlier now, the way it always was this time of year. "I'd want that," he said. "Good." Something in her voice loosened very slightly. Not relief exactly, but the small release of a person who had been holding a question longer than they expected to. "Saturday?" "Saturday works." After he hung up, Cole sat at the kitchen table for a long moment with his phone face down on the contract proposal, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with the shape of the evening, the small sounds of the house around him. The furnace, Haley's voice, the occasional car on Aldgate Street. Haley appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, book in hand, clearly intending to ask something about the book, and instead reading his face the way 9-year-olds read the faces of parents they paid close attention to. "Who called?" she asked. "A client," Cole said, which was technically true, or had been, or was in the process of becoming something more complicated than that. Haley looked at him with the particular skepticism of a child who had inherited her mother's ability to identify incomplete answers. "You look weird." "I look normal." "You look weird in a normal way." She held up her book. "Can you explain what a subpoena is?" "It's in the chapter." Cole pulled out the chair beside him. "Sit down," he said. "I'll explain it." She sat, tucking her feet under her the way she always sat, and opened the book to the page. And Cole explained subpoenas in terms that a 9-year-old who was mostly interested in how legal systems worked could follow. And outside, November continued its steady, indifferent work of making the year older, and the house held them both in its quiet and ordinary way. And Cole Barrett, who had crossed a street 5 weeks ago because he'd seen something that needed seeing and had the capacity to do something about it, sat with his daughter and explained the law. And the evening was, by any measure that mattered, a good one. The dinner with Evelyn happened on a Saturday. They went to a place in the Westmore neighborhood. Not expensive in a showy way, just good, the kind of restaurant that had been there for 20 years and had earned its reputation by doing the same things consistently well rather than reinventing itself every season. Cole arrived 3 minutes early, and Evelyn arrived 2 minutes early, which they acknowledged with the small, slightly awkward recognition of two people discovering they shared a habit. They ordered. They talked. The conversation was different from the ones they'd had in maintenance corridors and server rooms and federal interview spaces. Slower, with room in it. The way conversations had room when there was no deadline and nobody was moving toward anything in particular. Evelyn talked about the company. Not the crisis, but the company itself. What it had been when she'd started building it. The specific problems she'd been trying to solve. The people she'd brought in over the years who had become, without her quite planning it, something close to her primary community. Cole talked about the security consulting work, what he was good at, what he found tedious, the hospital system audit he was currently putting together, the particular satisfaction of finding a vulnerability before someone with bad intentions found it first. They didn't talk about the crisis directly until the food was almost finished, and then Evelyn brought it up not as a subject to be processed, but as something she'd been thinking about. "The day after," she said, "when everything was secured and the federal team was still in the building, I went back to the boardroom. I don't know why. I think I needed to see it without people in it, without the emergency going on." She turned her glass slowly on the table. The satellite console was still on. The transmission confirmation was still on the screen. I stood there and looked at it for probably 10 minutes. "What were you thinking?" Cole asked. "I was thinking that it almost didn't happen, that there were about 15 points in the morning when it could have gone the other way." She looked up. "And that the pivot point was a man across the street noticing that 3 SUVs had their engines running." "Engines running and they were positioned wrong," Cole said. "Right, the positioning." She almost smiled. "Most people don't see that." "You said that already." "It keeps being true." They sat with that for a moment. "How's your shoulder?" she asked. 80%. "That's better than functional." "Marginally?" She laughed. It was a real laugh, short and unguarded, the kind that came out before people decided whether they wanted to laugh. Cole heard it, and something in him registered it the way his body registered warmth after cold, not dramatically, just accurately. They stayed at the restaurant for 2.5 hours. Walking to the parking structure afterward, in the particular quiet of a Saturday night in the Westmore neighborhood, restaurants letting out, couples on the sidewalk, the smell of autumn in the way city air carried it, cooler at the edges. Evelyn said, "I'd like to do this again." "So would I," Cole said. "There's a board restructuring event in 3 weeks. It's not a date, it's a company thing. But Miranda will be there, and she keeps asking about you, and I think she'd like to see you." "Miranda asking about me," Cole said. "Is that good or bad?" "Miranda asks about very few people," Evelyn said. "So probably good." He walked her to her car. They said goodnight with the slight, honest awkwardness of two people who weren't sure of the protocol and weren't willing to pretend otherwise. Evelyn got in the car. Cole watched the taillights until they turned off Westmore Avenue. Then he drove home, relieved Mrs. Adler, checked on Haley, who was asleep with the light still on and the circulatory system book open on her chest, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway of his daughter's room for a moment, in the specific way he had stood in that doorway approximately 1,000 times, listening to her breathe, taking quiet inventory of the fact that she was fine. She was there. She was safe. Then he went to bed. The investigation continued its patient work through November and into December. Adrian Locke's cooperation produced results that extended well beyond the Carrington case. The two previous Vantage Meridian acquisitions were being re-examined by federal investigators, and 3 additional individuals connected to the consortium had been identified and were in the process of being charged. Malcolm Vane, whose legal team had filed every possible delay motion, eventually ran out of procedural runway and entered a guilty plea in early December on charges that included conspiracy, wire fraud, and violations of federal foreign investment statutes. His sentencing was scheduled for February. Adrian's sentencing, adjusted for cooperation, came first. Cole followed the coverage the way he followed most things, attentively but without investment in the outcome, trusting that the legal system would do what it did. The federal prison sentence was significant. The coverage called it a landmark case in the prosecution of foreign-backed corporate espionage. Miranda Shaw gave a brief statement outside the courthouse that Cole read twice because it was, in the way Miranda's communications tended to be, precise and without excess. And it said exactly what needed to be said. He texted Miranda, "Good statement." She replied 40 minutes later, "I had 3 weeks to write it. You had 30 seconds on a maintenance ladder. Perspective." Cole read this and found, to his own mild surprise, that he was smiling. The federal contract ratification came through on a Wednesday in mid-December, 91 days after the board restructuring was completed. Evelyn called him with the news at 4:47 in the afternoon, before the official press release, while Cole was in the pickup line at Haley's school. "It's done," she said. "Officially. Signed. Congratulations," he said. He meant it simply and completely. "I'm having a small company gathering Friday evening, to market. Nothing large, the new board members. Miranda, the senior staff who were in the building that day." A pause. "I'd like you to come." Cole watched the line of parents ahead of him inch forward. 3 cars back, he could see the school doors. "I'll be there," he said. "Bring Haley if you want. Miranda has been asking about her too, which is unusual because Miranda generally does not ask about children." "I'll ask her," Cole said. "She'll probably want to come if there's food. There will be food. Then she'll want to come." Haley did want to come, mostly because Cole had described Miranda Shaw as someone who had helped save a company by sitting alone in an office for 3 days and building a paper trail, and Haley had found this, for reasons that said something interesting about her, genuinely impressive. The gathering was held at Carrington's headquarters, not the boardroom, which nobody on the guest list was particularly eager to spend time in, but the large conference space on the 32nd floor that had a view of the city and enough room for the 40 or so people who attended. Cole arrived with Haley, who was wearing the dress she wore to things she considered moderately important, and who had, in the car on the way over, expressed measured skepticism about whether she would know anyone. She knew nobody. Within 20 minutes, she was talking to the 2 youngest board members about something that Cole, watching from across the room, couldn't hear, but which had both of them looking engaged, which was a reasonable measure of Haley's conversational capacity when she decided to apply it. Miranda Shaw found Cole near the window. She looked, in a social setting, very similar to how she looked in a professional one. Precise, observant, slightly outside the energy of the room, in a way that seemed like a choice rather than a deficit. She had a glass of wine and the expression of someone who was attending the event because it mattered and would leave when she'd stayed long enough for it to have been appropriate. "Your shoulder," she said, by way of greeting. Better, Cole said. 90%. Your face. Healed. There's a scar. He turned slightly to show her. The cut below his cheekbone had closed and the scar was still red enough to be visible, though the doctor had told him it would fade considerably over the next year. Adds character. It adds something, Miranda said. She looked at him for a moment. You know, I have spent 30 years in corporate law, and I have never, in the course of any professional matter, asked someone to hold a door while I did something that might result in my being physically harmed. That was a first. You didn't ask me to, Cole said. I was already there. That's the part I find interesting. She sipped her wine. Fine. You were just there. Already. She looked out the window at the city lights coming on in the early December dark. Evelyn told me what you said, about crossing the street because you saw it and you had time to do something. It was the honest answer. It was an unusual answer. Miranda paused. Most people see things and have time and don't do anything. That gap between seeing and doing, most people live in that gap their whole lives. Cole thought about Rachel. I thought about the Garfield overpass and the ice and the delivery truck and the 8 months he had spent afterward trying to figure out how to be a person who continued. He thought about the specific decision, not a dramatic one, more like a direction, that had come out of that time. That if he was in a position to see something and had the capacity to address it, the gap between seeing and doing was no longer an option he was willing to live in. He didn't say any of that to Miranda. I had good training, he said. Miranda looked at him with the expression of someone who understood that the shorter answer was also the one that would hold if you pressed on it. Yes, she said. I imagine you did. Evelyn found them a few minutes later, moving through the room with the easy authority of a person in her own space, stopping briefly to speak with various guests, arriving at the window with the particular quality of ending up somewhere she'd been heading for a while. She looked at Cole. She looked at Miranda. She looked at the city outside the window. 91 days, she said. That's how long it took. From the board restructuring, Miranda said, from the day in this building. Evelyn held her glass in both hands. 91 days from the day a security consultant crossed the street because 3 SUVs had their engines running. Miranda said, he also noted the positioning. He keeps mentioning the positioning. Because it was the positioning, Cole said. Evelyn looked at him, and this time the almost smile was a full one, tired and real and unguarded in the way that things were when you'd been through enough with someone that performance became beside the point. Cole looked back and felt the same thing he'd felt in the parking structure 3 weeks ago, and in the boardroom before that, and in the maintenance corridor before that. The recognition of a specific person, not the idea of them, not what they represented, just the actual particular fact of them existing and being in the room. Across the conference space, Haley had moved on from the board members and was now talking to Evelyn's assistant, Camille, who was showing her something on a tablet and explaining something that Haley was absorbing with the concentrated expression she wore when a subject had her full attention. Cole watched his daughter. Evelyn stood beside him and watched her too. She looks like you, Evelyn said. Everyone says that. She says it's not true. Children always say it's not true. She thinks she looks like herself. She's right about that too. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. How old is she again? 9, 10 in March. What does she want for her birthday? Cole turned to look at Evelyn. She was looking at Haley with an expression that was its own kind of unguarded, curious and careful at once, the way you looked at something you were trying to understand without pushing it. She wants a microscope, Cole said. A real one, not a toy one. What's the difference? About $300 and the ability to actually see cellular structure. Evelyn nodded slowly, filing this away. Cole noticed that she filed things away, that her attention was the kind that retained rather than passed through, and he noticed that he noticed this, which was its own piece of information. The gathering wound down the way these things did, gradually and by mutual unspoken agreement, guests saying their goodbyes in clusters, the evening pulling toward its close. Haley had been ready to leave for about 20 minutes and was managing it with the particular restraint of a child who understood that adults sometimes needed to finish things even when the child was done. Cole found her by the coat rack and helped her with her jacket. The lady with the silver hair, Haley said. Miranda. What about her? She told me she'd been a lawyer for 30 years, and the most important skill she had was writing things down. Haley considered this. She said most people forget that the thing that saves you is usually already in the room if you've been paying attention. Cole looked across the room to where Miranda was saying goodbye to Evelyn, two women standing in the particular ease of people who had been through something and come out the other side of it together. "That sounds right," he said. "She's kind of intense," Haley said. "Yes. I liked her." "Me too." Evelyn came to say goodbye. She shook Haley's hand, not the way adults shook children's hands, condescendingly, but the way she shook any hand, directly and without performance. And Haley responded in kind with the seriousness she brought to things she considered worth taking seriously. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said to her. "Thank you for the food," Haley said. "The mini quiches were excellent." Something broke open in Evelyn's face, genuine surprise, then genuine delight. "I'll tell the caterer." In the elevator going down, Haley stood beside Cole in the companionable quiet they often shared after social events, both of them processing, neither of them forcing conversation. The city descended past the elevator's glass exterior, light by light. "She's nice," Haley said eventually. "Who?" The look Haley gave him suggested she found this question somewhat beneath him. "Evelyn," she said. Cole looked at the elevator display. 22nd floor. 21st. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Haley nodded once, apparently satisfied, and went back to looking at the descending city, and Cole stood beside her in the elevator going down through a building that had been 91 days ago, the most dangerous place he'd been in years, and he thought about how the same space could hold entirely different things depending on what happened inside it, and he thought about how much of life was that. The same room, different contents, different day. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Cole and Haley walked out into the December night, and the city was cold and lit and full of its ordinary business. And neither of them said anything for a while, which was fine, which was exactly right, which was the specific texture of a life that was, in its imperfect and continuing way, good. January arrived the way January always arrived in that city. Without ceremony, just a shift in the quality of the cold, something more settled and committed about it than November or December. The cold of a season that had stopped being new and was now simply what the world was for a while. Malcolm Vane's sentencing came through on the 14th. Cole read about it on his phone at the kitchen table while Haley ate cereal across from him, her library book propped against the orange juice carton, her spoon working automatically while her eyes moved across the page. The sentence was 11 years, reduced to 8 with eligibility for further reduction contingent on continued cooperation with ongoing investigations into Vantage Meridian Group's broader network. The coverage called it the most significant conviction in a foreign-backed corporate espionage case in nearly a decade. Malcolm Vane, according to the reporter who had clearly spoken to someone in the courthouse, had said nothing during sentencing. He'd looked straight ahead at the wall above the judge's bench and said nothing at all. Cole set his phone down and drank his coffee. "What?" Haley said without looking up from her book. "Nothing. How'd you know something was something?" "You make a different breathing sound when you're thinking about something." Cole looked at his daughter. She turned a page, still without looking up. "The man who was in charge of the thing at the building," Cole said. "He was sentenced today." Haley looked up now. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to things that had edges. "For a long time?" "Long enough." She nodded once, went back to her book. "Good," she said, simply and completely, and turned another page. Cole finished his coffee and made her lunch and drove her to school, and the morning was ordinary in the specific way mornings were ordinary when they came after something resolving. A little lighter, though the light was hard to point at. He texted Evelyn. Vane sentenced, 11 years. She replied within 2 minutes, "I know." Miranda called at 7 a.m. She said, and I quote, "The system occasionally works." Cole read that and felt something move through him that was not quite laughter but was related to it. "That sounds right," he texted back. "Are you free Saturday?" Evelyn replied. He was. They had been seeing each other since the dinner in November. Not formally, not with any announced intention. More the way two people found themselves in the same direction and kept walking that way because it made sense. Saturday dinners, occasionally. A Sunday afternoon in December when Evelyn had come to Aldgate Street for the first time, ostensibly to drop off a document she could easily have emailed, but which Cole understood was also something else. And they'd ended up drinking coffee at his kitchen table while Haley showed Evelyn the circulatory system book with the focused enthusiasm of someone presenting a thing they loved to a person they were still deciding about. Evelyn had asked real questions about the book. Not performed questions, not the questions adults ask children to seem engaged, but actual questions, following up on Haley's answers, asking what she found most interesting, disagreeing mildly with one of Haley's conclusions about how the lymphatic system worked and explaining why, which had produced in Haley an expression of pure, delighted surprise that someone had bothered to actually disagree with her instead of just nodding. After Evelyn left, Haley had said, "She knows things." "She runs a defense technology company," Cole said. "That's not what I mean." Haley had her thinking face on. "I mean, she knows things, and she listens to other things. Some people only do one or the other." Cole had not had a useful response to this, because it was accurate, and there wasn't much to add to accuracy. The Saturday in January was cold and clear, the kind of day that looked warmer from inside than it felt outside. The sky an unambiguous blue that made everything look sharp. Evelyn came to Aldgate Street in the mid-morning, and the three of them went to the farmers' market that set up in the Meridian Park Pavilion on winter Saturdays, smaller than the summer version but insistent, vendors selling root vegetables, and preserved things and handmade items and good coffee from a truck that had a line regardless of temperature. It was not a planned outing in any structured sense. Evelyn had mentioned the market, Cole had mentioned that Haley wanted to go, and it had become a thing they were doing without requiring a conversation about whether they were doing it. Haley walked between them for a while, then ahead of them when something caught her attention, then circling back. She moved through the market the way she moved through most environments, with the systematic interest of someone who wanted to understand how things were arranged and why. She stopped at a vendor selling geodes split open to show their crystal interiors, and the vendor explained them with patience and genuine enthusiasm, and Haley listened with her arms crossed and her chin tilted slightly up, which was her paying close attention posture. Cole and Evelyn stood a few feet behind her, both holding coffee cups, watching. "She's going to buy one," Evelyn said. "She's going to ask me if she can buy one, and then feel guilty about the price, and then decide she doesn't need it." "How much are they?" "Probably 12 to 15. That's not much. She doesn't know that yet." Cole watched his daughter pick up a geode and turn it over in her hands with the careful reverence she brought to objects she found beautiful. She's still in the phase where she thinks about what things cost in terms of what they represent, rather than what they actually are. $12 is $12 worth of effort that I made. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. That's a very mature way to think about it. She's a very particular kid. She is. Evelyn sipped her coffee. She gets it from somewhere. Cole looked at her sideways. She was looking at the market stalls ahead, not at him, with the neutral expression she wore when she said something she meant but wasn't sure she wanted to examine. Cole decided not to examine it either, at least not out loud, because some things were better received without comment. Haley came back holding the geode. "It's $14, she said, looking at Cole. "Okay. I want to get it, but it's $14. I heard. Is that okay?" Cole reached into his jacket for his wallet. "You've been asking about rocks for 2 months. Yes." Haley looked briefly, intensely relieved. The relief of a child who has decided they want something and is not entirely sure they're allowed to want it. She turned back to the vendor. Cole paid. The vendor wrapped the geode in newspaper with the care of someone who took their work seriously regardless of the transaction size. Haley held the wrapped geode against her chest for the rest of the market. On the way back to the car, walking through the park where the bare trees cast their winter shadows across the path, Haley moved ahead again, and Evelyn fell into step beside Cole in the natural way she had. Not staged, not performing ease, just the actual ease of a person comfortable in their own movement. "I need to tell you something," Evelyn said. "Okay." "The company's public affairs team has been handling most of the media coverage, which I've been grateful for. But there's a congressional oversight committee that's begun a review of the federal contracts vetting process, specifically looking at whether the process needs strengthening to catch this kind of foreign infiltration earlier." She paused. "They've asked me to testify." "When?" "March, Washington. It'll be 2, maybe 3 days." "That makes sense," Cole said. You're the person who knows what happened. I've been asked if I'm willing to speak about the role that outside intervention played. Specifically, how the situation was identified and escalated before it became unrecoverable. She glanced at him. Your name will come up. Cole watched Haley navigate around a patch of ice on the path. That's fine. You might be asked to testify as well, eventually. Not in March, but as the investigation broadens. Also fine. Evelyn was quiet for a few steps. You're very calm about that. I told the truth to federal investigators for 4 hours on the day it happened. Telling it again to a different set of people isn't harder. He looked at her. Are you nervous about the testimony? She considered the question honestly, which he'd noticed was her habit. She didn't deflect or minimize, she actually thought about it first. Yes, she said. Not about the facts. The facts are straightforward. I'm nervous about… She stopped, reorganizing. I'm nervous about standing in front of a room and saying, out loud, in an official setting, that I didn't see what was happening in my own company for 14 months. That the person I trusted most was the person undermining everything. She looked straight ahead. That's a thing I'm going to have to say and mean. You didn't fail to see it, Cole said. Adrian was specifically constructed to be invisible to the kind of oversight you had. That's different from carelessness. I know, intellectually. A beat. The emotional version is less tidy. The emotional version of most things is less tidy. Is that from experience? Extensive experience, Cole said. Evelyn glanced at him, and there was something in the glance, quick, unguarded, that landed in a place he'd stopped trying to catalog or explain. Some things you just knew. The way you knew weather before it arrived, or the way you knew, standing in a maintenance corridor with a stranger, that this particular stranger was going to do exactly what they said they would. Ahead of them, Haley stopped and turned around. Can we get lunch? There was a place near here that had the soup. The soup, Cole said. Can you be more specific? The bread bowl soup. We went in October. Cole tried to remember. They had gone a lot of places in October. October felt in retrospect like a year ago. I know the one, Evelyn said. Hargrove's, on the east side of the park. Haley pointed at Evelyn with the expression of someone whose argument had just received unexpected support. She knows it. She wins, apparently, Cole said. They went to Hargrove's, which was warm inside and smelled of bread and something slow-cooked, and they sat at a table near the window where the park was visible through the glass, the bare trees and the pale January sky. Haley ordered the bread bowl without deliberation, which was her approach to menus when she already knew what she wanted. Evelyn ordered the same, which surprised Haley enough that she commented on it. I like soup, Evelyn said. Most CEOs seem like salad people, Haley said. Evelyn looked at her. What does a salad person seem like? Haley thought about this with genuine effort. Like they made a decision about lunch a long time ago and they're not revisiting it. Cole pressed his lips together. Evelyn said with complete seriousness, that is the most accurate description of a certain kind of executive I have ever heard. Haley looked moderately pleased with herself, but tried not to show it. The soup arrived. They ate. The conversation moved through several things. Haley's ongoing struggle with long division, which she was willing to discuss at length with anyone who would listen. A question Haley had about whether Evelyn had always known she wanted to run a company, which produced an answer that was honest rather than polished. Evelyn saying that she had known she wanted to solve a specific set of problems, and the company had been the most direct way to do that, which was different from wanting the company itself. Cole's hospital security audit, which was progressing and which had turned up 2 vulnerabilities that the hospital's existing team had missed for 3 years, and which Cole found this professionally satisfying in the way that finding things before they caused harm was always satisfying. At some point during the meal, Cole became aware, not for the first time but more clearly than before, of what the table looked like from outside. A man, a woman, a child, soup and bread bowls, a park through the window. The ordinary furniture of an ordinary Saturday. He sat with the awareness of it and did not pull away from it, which itself was a thing, the not pulling away, because he had pulled away from things for a long time without quite naming it as pulling away, and he was trying, with varying success, to stop. After lunch, walking back through the park toward the cars, Haley moved between them rather than ahead, which she didn't always do and which Cole registered without comment. She was holding the wrapped geode in both hands, still careful with it. The afternoon light was the specific pale gold of January, long and low, making everything cast longer shadows than it deserved. "Dad," Haley said. "Yeah." "When is Evelyn's work event? The one you said was in March." Cole looked at Evelyn briefly. "Congressional testimony isn't exactly a work event. Is it in Washington?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Have you been to Washington?" Haley asked her. "Several times. For meetings." "I haven't been." Haley said this neutrally, not as a complaint or a request, just a fact being placed on the table to see what happened to it. Evelyn glanced at Cole. Cole said nothing, which was its own kind of response. "Maybe sometime," Evelyn said. She said it carefully, not as a promise and not as a dismissal, as a real maybe, which was different from both. Haley nodded, seemed satisfied with this. They walked. At the cars, parked near each other in the lot at the park's edge, they stopped with the particular mild awkwardness of an ending that nobody quite wanted to name as an ending. Haley had already climbed into the truck and was unwrapping the geode with focused attention, holding it up to catch the winter light through the window. Cole and Evelyn stood by their respective cars. "Saturday was good," Evelyn said. "Yeah," Cole said. "It was." She looked at him for a moment with the expression he'd learned by now was her version of gathering herself. Not nervousness, just the pause before saying a thing she'd decided to say. "I want you to know something." "Okay." "When I came to Aldgate Street in December, the coffee." She held her keys in her hand but didn't move toward the car. "I wasn't there to drop off a document." "I know," Cole said. "I just wanted to be clear that I know you know." "Okay," he said again, and the word carried more than its syllable count. Something settled between them, not resolved exactly, because nothing in human life resolved cleanly at a specific moment, but settled. The way things settled when two people stopped carrying them separately and put them down in the same place at the same time. Evelyn got in her car. Cole got in the truck. Through the windshield, he could see her car's reverse lights come on, and then she pulled out of the lot and turned north on Meridian Avenue, and Cole sat for a moment in the truck, while Haley held the geode up and turned it slowly in the light, and said, "Look, the crystals are purple." Cole looked. They were. "Amethyst," he said. The guy said it might be. He wasn't sure. She lowered it and cradled it in her lap. "It's really good." Cole started the truck. "Yeah," he said. "It is." He drove home through the January streets, the city moving past the windows in its ordinary way, and he thought about the things that had happened since October. The morning in the diner, the cold coffee, the 3 SUVs and their running engines, and he thought about how strange and exact the way things moved was, how a particular Tuesday morning had pulled a thread that had unraveled into something he hadn't anticipated and wouldn't have designed and would not have changed. He thought about Rachel the way he still thought about Rachel, not as grief anymore, or not only as grief, but as the presence she still was in the shape of his life, and especially in the shape of Haley, in the way Haley held her opinions and her curiosity and the specific manner she had of going very still when she was deciding something important. Rachel was in all of that. She always would be. Cole had spent a long time thinking that being a good father meant keeping that space intact and separate, not letting other things into it, protecting it. He understood now that he'd been thinking about it wrong. The space wasn't a sealed room. It was just part of the house. You could have people in the house without disturbing what the room contained. That realization had not come all at once. It had come the way most important things came, slowly, sideways, in ordinary moments like coffee at a kitchen table, or a farmer's market in the cold, or a child saying the crystals are purple with straightforward delight. He pulled on to Aldgate Street. In February, Haley turned 10. The birthday fell on a Thursday, which was not ideal for celebration, so the actual party happened the Saturday before. 6 of Haley's friends. A living room that was briefly and comprehensively reorganized by the presence of 6 10-year-olds, and a cake that Cole had made himself because Haley had decided 2 years ago that store-bought cakes were too sweet in the wrong way, and Cole had accepted this verdict and learned to bake. Miranda came. She arrived with a book, a serious adult book about the human immune system that she had apparently decided was appropriate for Haley. And she sat on Cole's couch with her wine and watched the children with the expression of a person who found children interesting in the way scientists found interesting organisms interesting, with genuine curiosity and no particular impulse to participate. Evelyn came late because she'd had a call from Washington that ran over, and she arrived slightly flustered and slightly apologetic, with Haley's gift under her arm, and Haley spotted her from across the room and waved with the uncomplicated directness of a child who had decided someone was part of the occasion. The gift was a microscope, a real one, not a toy, not a beginner's model, an actual entry-level laboratory microscope with 3 objective lenses and a mechanical stage and a quality of construction that was clearly intended to last. Haley opened it with the particular stillness of a child receiving something beyond what they expected. She looked at it in the box. She looked at Evelyn. "This is a real one," Haley said. "You said you wanted a real one." "I told my dad that." "Your dad told me." Evelyn said it simply, without making it into more than it was. "You should set it up on your desk. The lenses need to be cleaned with a specific cloth. It comes in the box. Or they'll scratch." Haley looked at the microscope again. Then she looked at Evelyn with an expression Cole didn't have an exact name for. Not the cautious assessment she'd worn in December, not the easy acceptance she'd shown at the market. Something between them. Something that was making up its mind. "Thank you," Haley said. It came out level and serious, which was how Haley said things she meant. "You're welcome," Evelyn said, the same way. Miranda from the couch said, "The lenses really do need that cloth. Fingerprints are permanent." "Miranda," Cole said, "it's true." "I know it's true." "Then I don't see the problem." Haley laughed, a real laugh, the full-throated kind she didn't always let out in social situations. And the sound of it moved through the room and broke whatever had been formal about the moment. They ate cake. Cole's cake, which was chocolate with a frosting that Haley had described in advance with specifications, and which Cole had executed to approximately 90% of those specifications. Haley declared it acceptable, which was high praise. Later, when the friends had gone home and the living room was partly restored and Haley was in her room setting up the microscope with the seriousness of someone beginning a significant project, Cole stood in the kitchen doing dishes and Evelyn stood beside him drying them, which was Haley's position and which Evelyn had taken without discussion, just picking up the dish towel and doing the next natural thing. Miranda sat at the kitchen table with the last of her wine, watching them both. "She's going to want to look at everything under that microscope," Miranda said. "I know," Cole said. "She was talking about onion skin on the way home from the market last month." "Onion skin is a good start. Cheek cells are good too. Pond water if you can get it." Miranda paused. "I had a microscope at her age. My mother bought it from a garage sale. One of the lenses was cracked." She said this without particular sentiment, just placing it in the conversation. "I used it anyway, cracked lens and all." Cole glanced at her. "What did you end up doing with it?" "I became a lawyer," Miranda said, with the precise intonation of someone delivering a punchline they'd been holding for a long time. Evelyn put a plate in the cabinet and looked at Miranda with fond exasperation. "You could have been a scientist." "I was better suited to finding things other people missed." Miranda finished her wine. "Different skill, same impulse." Cole thought about that. He thought about the folder Miranda had built over 3 days in a locked office, and the fiber line terminal 2 doors down from her, and the moment she'd handed him a first aid kit with the grim practicality of someone who hoped it wouldn't be needed and suspected it would, finding things other people missed. Yes, that was exactly right. He washed the last pan and turned off the water. Miranda stood, collected her coat from the back of a chair, and said her goodbyes with the efficiency of a person who treated departures the way she treated most things, directly and without excess. She paused at the kitchen doorway. "Cole?" she said. He turned. "That scar," she said, looking at his cheekbone. "Does it still hurt?" "Not anymore," she nodded. "Good." Then she left, and a moment later the front door closed behind her, and the house settled into the quiet of an evening winding down. Evelyn was still standing by the cabinet where she'd put the last plate. She had the dish towel in her hands but wasn't doing anything with it, just holding it, looking at the kitchen in the way people looked at spaces that had recently been full of people and had just become quiet. "You baked that cake yourself," she said. "Yes." "From scratch." Haley has specifications. Evelyn set the dish towel on the counter. She turned to look at him with the expression he'd learned to recognize as the one that came before she said something that mattered to her. Cole, I want to say something and I don't want you to. I don't need a response. I just want to say it. He waited. I spend most of my professional life in rooms where everyone is performing something, she said. Performing confidence, performing certainty, performing authority. It's not dishonest exactly. It's just the grammar of that environment. You say things a certain way because the environment requires it. She looked at her hands for a moment. I haven't been performing anything around you. I don't know if you've noticed that or what you make of it if you have, but I wanted you to know it's true. Cole stood in the kitchen of the house he lived in with his daughter in the ordinary yellow light of an ordinary evening and looked at the woman across from him who had climbed 13 floors of a service shaft on the worst morning of her professional life without asking for a break, and had sat at a federal terminal with shaking hands and waited for them to stop shaking and then kept typing. And he thought about all the ways people showed you who they were before they ever said a word about it. I noticed, he said. Something in her face relaxed. Not dramatically, just a small release, the way a held breath released. From down the hall, Haley's voice. Dad, come look. I found something in the onion skin. Cole and Evelyn looked at each other. She had an onion, Evelyn said. She plans ahead, Cole said. They walked down the hall to Haley's room, where the microscope was set up on the desk with the care of someone who intended to keep it that way, its brass and chrome catching the desk lamp. Haley was bent over the eyepiece with one hand on the focus knob, making small adjustments with the patience she reserved for things that required precision. Look, she said. She stepped aside. Cole bent to the eyepiece. The slide held a thin layer of onion skin, and through the lens the cellular structure was visible. The cell walls in their honeycomb arrangement, each one distinct, the whole thing a kind of order that was only visible when you got close enough. He straightened up and Evelyn took his place, bending to the eyepiece, and for a moment she was still, just looking. I can see the individual cells, she said. The rectangular ones are the cell walls, Haley said, in the tone of someone who had already read the chapter. The little dot inside each one is the nucleus. If I stain it, I can see more, but I don't have the right stain yet. What stain? Evelyn asked, straightening. Iodine. It makes the nucleus more visible. Haley was already looking it up on her tablet. They sell it at the pharmacy. We can get it this week, Cole said. Haley looked at him with the clear, unsentimental satisfaction of a person whose plans were proceeding. Okay. She looked at Evelyn. Do you want to see again? You can adjust the focus yourself, the knob on the right. Evelyn bent to the eyepiece again, adjusted the focus, looked for a long moment. It's remarkable, she said, that it's all just there, organized like that. Everything is organized like that, Haley said. We just can't see it usually. Cole stood in his daughter's doorway and looked at the two of them. Haley explaining cellular structure with the authority of someone who had spent the last hour reading about it. Evelyn listening the way she listened, which was with her whole attention rather than the surface of it. And he thought about the things you couldn't see until you looked, and about the gap between seeing and doing that Miranda had mentioned, and about how the entire shape of this particular winter, the warmth of it, the specific quality of it, had begun with a cup of cold coffee and 3 SUVs and a decision that had taken less than 10 seconds and had felt, at the time, like the most obvious thing in the world. He didn't know what the next year looked like. He didn't know how the things that were currently in motion between him and Evelyn would settle, or how Haley would feel about any of it as she got older and understood more of it. He didn't know whether the hospital security audit would turn into more work, or whether the federal testimony would be a single afternoon or a longer involvement. He didn't know whether the scar on his cheekbone would fade to nothing or stay visible, which the doctor had said could go either way. What he knew was this. The house on Aldgate Street was lit from inside on a February night, and his daughter was explaining cell nuclei to a woman who was listening as though the information mattered, and there was cake left in the kitchen, and the geode on Haley's windowsill caught the lamplight and held it in its purple crystals. And Cole Barrett, who had spent 4 years learning to live with loss and 2 years learning to live with the shape of the life that loss had made, was standing in a doorway in his own home feeling, without apology, that this was good. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, not the clean, finished version of anything, just good. That was enough. That was in fact more than enough, because good was not the consolation prize. Good was the thing itself. Good was what people were actually after when they chased the bigger words, the dramatic ones, the ones that sounded more significant but tended to evaporate on contact with actual life. Cole Barrett had crossed a street in October because he saw something that needed addressing and he had the capacity to address it. He hadn't calculated the return. He hadn't imagined this kitchen, this room, this February night. But standing in the doorway of his daughter's room, watching her show someone she was learning to trust how to see something too small for ordinary eyes, he understood, in the plain, unadorned way that real understanding arrived, without music or announcement, that the return had been enormous, that sometimes the most important thing you did on an ordinary Tuesday was cross the street, and that on the other side of the street, if you were paying attention and if you were willing to move, was everything.